The person who was hurt is painted as the person scorned and all that hell hath no fury BS. Something that many of you who have been in relationships with any kind of narcissist, whether it's a partner or a family member, someone you work with, is that when they tell you you're being too dramatic. Well, let's break that down, because that's such a classical dynamic in these relationships, and yet it really frustrates people. So what does it mean? What does it mean when a narcissistic person tells you that you're being too sensitive or too dramatic? So let's go back to that's actually a very interesting question, right? Because it happens all the time. What does it actually mean? How do you decode this when somebody, particularly somebody who is narcissistic, is telling you that you are being overly dramatic, you're being overly sensitive? Okay, I think some of you already know the answer, right? You've watched enough of these videos, you've read enough about this, you know the answer, and I wish I could give you multiple choice. Yes, you know, it's gaslighting, right? It's a form of gaslighting. It's a form of manipulation. It sheds doubt on your state of mind and your emotional processing. When someone calls you too sensitive, okay, you react to something like, oh, you're too sensitive, they are actually doubting or questioning the validity of your emotional reaction in a given situation. So can anyone really do that? You have the reaction you have. There is also an element of shaming, right? They should have shamed your emotions, because many survivors of narcissistic abuse already live with a tremendous amount of shame, blaming themselves for what has happened in the relationship, and often feeling very ashamed for not being able to figure it out. Like, why didn't I see this sooner? I'm an idiot. And they really, really will go at themselves. A narcissist telling you that you are doing it wrong, that basically that you're doing emotion wrong, that you're not feeling things the right way, can actually feel shaming, that you can't even do your emotions right. And that sense of shame results in even more isolation. By saying that you're being too dramatic, that you're being too emotional, it may not only result in a sense of shame, you are also being told, again, that your emotions lack validity, right? And that pulls you away from your reality. And what it also becomes is a chance for a narcissistic or antagonistic person to control the emotional temperature of the situation. And remember, and I've said this repeatedly, narcissistic people control the thermostat. Both literally, they actually get to run the thermostat in the house, but also emotionally. They're having a happy day, then you have to be happy, or they'll criticize you for raining on their parade. Now, many times, people view gaslighting as something quite different, right? They don't think of gaslighting as somebody saying you're too sensitive, but they might view gaslighting, for example, as the narcissistic person controlling your physical space. For example, they'll move a TV remote or move your keys and then deny they moved them. They'll take a check out of the checkbook and said that they didn't take the check, and that will mess you up when you're trying to balance the checkbook. Or they'll deny things that you know happened. For example, they'll say something like, oh, we never went to that restaurant. Well, some of you may be wondering, well, aren't there reactions, in fact, truly reactions that actually are too dramatic or just too much? I mean, I think it's extremely subjective. For example, let's say someone shows up 20 minutes late to a birthday gathering or a casual dinner where people you knew were going to sort of keep streaming in. And then because they showed up 20 minutes late, you start screaming and crying and pulling your hair. I'll give you that. That's probably a disproportionate reaction. Or if someone says to you that they won't be able to help you with the laundry, and you start sobbing and wailing and say that you feel like you might die because they don't help you with the laundry, I'll give you disproportionate on that. That's not the sort of distinction I'm trying to draw here. This is about when a person shows appropriate emotion, real emotion, in an appropriate manner, following as part of an interchange. For example, you say that you might feel hurt about a disappointment that's happened between the two of you, or you just feel hurt about something that happened to you. But perhaps if your reaction, and you express it clearly, it's hurt or anger or some other strong show of emotion in the face of your real hurt, and you express that, and if your expression of it is not something that works for the narcissist, especially if if it is something they wouldn't like. But you're not screaming, you're not yelling, you're not engaging in violence, you're not physically, sort of throwing objects. And under those conditions, someone tells you that you're being overly dramatic for sharing your feelings. That's really going to mess with your head. It's really going to leave you doubting yourself. Too often, in relationships that are characterized by narcissism or other high conflict styles, telling someone who is appropriately sharing their feelings or emotions that they are being too emotional, let's face it, it's a way of the narcissistic person in the relationship deflecting their own responsibility in the situation. If you are expressing disappointment about something that arises in a relationship with a narcissistic person, instead of the narcissistic person directly addressing their behavior or their words, what they're saying or their own conduct, by instead what they do is they'll call you out as too sensitive or too emotional or too dramatic. What it does is it shifts and it deflects the responsibility for emotion in the relationship or for anything in the relationship off of them onto you. The focus shifts to you and your alleged dysregulation instead of on their behavior. And then you actually find yourself defending yourself, and instead of addressing the issue at hand, which was sometimes their behavior. So much of this comes down to basically what I could call the narcissistic person's allergy to empathy. Meeting someone halfway and taking their reaction in and being present with somebody else is empathic. Instead of labeling it, and then if you label it as overly dramatic, that's not empathic. So many people in any kind of narcissistic relationship have run into this pattern, even when they're growing up as a child. For example, narcissistic parents are notorious for negating their children's disappointment by saying really unkind things like, "Oh, stop making such a big deal of it," or "Stop being so dramatic." The parent will be saying this to a child. At those times, the child looks to the parent for what we call co-regulation, to get the mirroring that something, that's basically the way the parent reacts, would show the child, yep, something is difficult is happening, and the child is safe to emotionally share it and safely let it out. That legacy of being told that you are being too dramatic or too sensitive can permeate into childhood and leave a person permanently doubting their own reactions or censoring all of their own emotions. Narcissistic people do not like having to be held accountable for their behaviors or their words. Taking responsibility and accountability are very, very difficult for narcissistic people. And instead, they'll often deflect by diminishing the person who is giving the feedback. Telling a person they are being too dramatic or too sensitive is often a quick way for a difficult person to take the focus off of their behavior and maintain control in a given situation. Next time you are called overly dramatic, I want you to take a step back, assess your own reaction through a realistic lens, and if your reaction was really what you think was within normal limits and was an acknowledgement, honestly, of your experience, instead of pathologizing yourself, think about how it serves the other person to label you as such. It is so classical for people in these relationships to be viewed as overly dramatic. And in fact, many times for a narcissistic person in these relationships saying, "Oh, I don't like drama." And because to you that idea of drama is now being portrayed as something undesirable, people in these relationships will find themselves losing their full range of emotion and almost narrowing it to a point where there's absolutely sort of nothing to them anymore, that they're almost behaving in sort of a robotic lockstep in a way that basically suits the narcissistic person in their lives. It would be a crime and a shame to lose that beautiful range of emotion that makes each of us individual. Hope that makes sense and clarifies some of why narcissistic people so consistently call other people overly sensitive or overly dramatic. It's a tool of control, and it's definitely an indication of gaslighting. Have you ever been accused of being hypersensitive by a narcissist? Yes or no? Just drop that in the comments. Let's start from there. Okay? And welcome to this channel if you're new. Yes, I do ask you questions, and sort of interesting to see they come out. If you're new, please do join, subscribe, hit that bell. Videos come out every day, and that way you know when anyone comes out. So when I make these videos, I try to speak as precisely and as clearly and cleanly about terminology as possible, so there's no confusion. And yet, I'm not going to be perfect, and I'm not always going to make things as clear as I should, and so I'll sometimes go back and take a look at videos and look at comments I've gotten and try to do better. So I want to go back and clarify further on a particular video topic, because it's something that's arisen, and I think people's critiques of it really bear further discussion. There's an element of narcissism that I've talked about, and specifically it's around the hypersensitivity to criticism that we witness in narcissism and in narcissistic personality styles. People who are narcissistic or have these narcissistic personality styles tend to perceive criticism everywhere. So even constructive feedback can be experienced as an attack, and that is often followed by a rageful and strongly emotional reaction by the narcissist that can actually be very unsettling if it's targeted as you. Basically, our critique of them brings up their shame, and boom, that shame rage spiral I've talked about. But it is that word hypersensitivity that has brought some, critical emails and comments and questions. And so it really pushed me to go back and make sure I'm a bit more clear, because I understand where these concerns are coming from. Hypersensitivity is a bit of a trigger word in the narcissism world, and I actually think for good reason. Why? Because many times people who are narcissistic will accuse their partners of being hypersensitive. For example, let's say your narcissist is doing something awful and you show some strong emotion to them, or you give them feedback they didn't like. They'll say, "Ugh, you're being so hypersensitive." And it can be a very gaslighty experience. As an example, the narcissist may have canceled something that was very important to you without consulting you. I don't know, flights to a wedding that you were really looking forward to, or something like that, or how you're going to move to a new apartment or something. And you share your disappointment. You might even appropriately share feelings of anger. You might even cry. And the narcissist will then say, you are being hypersensitive because the cancellation isn't a big deal, but it was a big deal to you. So those are the kinds of situations, that's sort of one of a million examples. So let me try putting this terminology out again in a better way. What I call the hypersensitivity to criticism we see in narcissism may actually be better described as rageful or emotionally unsettling reactivity secondary to hypersensitivity in the wake of perceived criticism. It's a lot of words, okay? Now here's the deal. I think rage in 99.99 cases is really unacceptable. It's typically a disproportionate, terrifying reaction, and it's often harmful to people who are on the receiving end. With narcissism, the chain that sort of unfolds is that you might give them feedback on something. So let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say you go to your narcissistic partner, you might say, last night you were talking over me and you interrupted me a few times and it didn't feel great. So could we just talk about it? They may respond to that statement like, oh, so you think I'm rude. You think I'm a rude person and you think I can't communicate. And now you're telling me everyone thinks I'm an idiot and you're so important. Of course, you didn't say any of those things. And then you start getting confused because your words got so twisted. And you might then respond and say, no, 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 that's not what I said. That's not what I was trying to say. I was actually just trying to make an important point last night when we were talking about money because it's gotten tighter and it has some major ramifications. And it just felt like I couldn't finish a thought last night. And we were talking about something important. And the narcissist will then respond with, oh, so I get it. I am a financially irresponsible loser. And keep in mind that no one in our family would have any money if it weren't for me. So frankly, I cannot believe how ungrateful you are. I am so sorry though that you are so darn sensitive that I didn't give you your precious time, oh little Miss Queen, to talk slowly the way you do and make your stupid point. And then the narcissist will storm out or yell some more or punch a wall or insult you more. That's what I mean by rageful or emotional reactivity. There's a lot of word salading. You know, that's what I mean when I see it in narcissism. That's what the hypersensitivity in the rageful emotional reactivity and hypersensitivity in the face of perceived criticism. But I completely understand where the confusion comes from. Survivors of narcissistic abuse will often do this to them themselves all the time. They themselves, the survivors of narcissistic abuse, will say, maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I am hypersensitive. Maybe I do take things too personally. So that idea of hypersensitivity is a term that can get a little bit contorted. So while rageful or emotional reactivity, secondary to hypersensitivity in the wake of perceived criticism. That's like a lot of words to say. It's what I was in fact trying to say all along. And sometimes we just have to say a lot of words. It's less about the sensitivity to the criticism that I'm concerned about than it is to the reactive emotionality in the face of any kind of feedback that is the narcissistic signature move. And then after they have their tantrum, they don't like that people point it out to them. I hope that the next time it happens to you, that this video helps it make more sense, and that you'll stop calling yourself out as hypersensitive. If your sensitivity is just because you had a feeling and it's not you sort of screaming out with this explosive rage, that's not what I was speaking about. But like I said, I'm always trying to get it better. And so I hope that clarifies what I mean by that explosive hypersensitivity to criticism we see in narcissistic people. It's usually when they'll deflect and gaslight and blame, and then the issue never gets resolved. And over time, you may feel less and less able to ever give a narcissist feedback because you're so afraid of their reaction. In the case of somebody just having tears, for example, I remember witnessing an event where a woman who was in a horribly narcissistically abusive relationship was being deeply criticized by her partner. And she didn't say anything, but she was silently crying in the kitchen. And the narcissist is like, oh my God, you're so ridiculously hypersensitive. So she couldn't even have her quiet emotional moment. She wasn't even interacting with him. She was just so hurt. So those are the kinds of things that I was implying. So I hope that makes it more clear. And I always welcome the feedback because, like I said, I want to get it right. I want this to help people. And I certainly don't ever want it to lead to any self-doubt for anyone. So have you ever had a situation where you didn't take the bait, or you set a boundary, or you stop giving the benefit of the doubt, or you stay calm when they are screaming and baiting, and then when someone else, a third party, asks you about how to connect with the person who is doing all of this, you say, there's no point in trying. This other person is toxic, they're narcissistic, they won't change, and you know what? I'm no longer going to engage with them. Have you ever done that? Well, then the other person, this third party who's watching all of this play out, calls you out as being the difficult person, telling you that you are not being very charitable, that you are passive aggressive for not responding, saying that you are being unkind, and implying that you are the one who's being holier than thou, as though, oh, I guess you've never done anything bad and now you're not talking to them, and that now you're all high and mighty. Have you ever had that experience? After all the abuse you may have endured in a narcissistic relationship, once you finally get it, stop engaging with it, stop making excuses for it, and even are willing to call it what it is to other people, or just letting them know you're not going to fall for this again. To then have you be viewed as the problem, as the rotten one, or the intolerant one, or the self-righteous one, it really can feel like a bitter pill to swallow. So let's break this down a little bit, because it's a dynamic that's been happening to many people I'm watching and working with. How do you learn to tolerate being the bad one once you actually understand narcissism and set the boundaries and disengage? Because in a world in which most people are either narcissistic, are enablers, or just don't get it, they are very quick to call out the people who are smart enough to disengage, very quick to call out those people who disengage, the bad people. It really feels awful. You go through the arduous process of healing from narcissistic abuse. You go to therapy. You watch endless numbers of videos. You read some books. Maybe you started by talking to therapists who didn't get it. You talked to friends who didn't get it. You kept getting gaslighted. And one day, you hit the damned wall. And you say, enough. Enough. I refuse to engage with this narcissistic nonsense anymore. But once you get through to the other side, once you decide to stop engaging, once you stop falling for the gaslighting, once you set solid boundaries, once you stop taking the bait, you stop with the justifying and the excuse making, and you refuse to play the game anymore. Once you protect and preserve yourself, I'm going to tell you right out the gate, to do this is courageous and brave and strong and really, really difficult. And the grief and the rumination will continue to plague you even after you feel like you get it and you set the boundaries and you do it right. But then to do all that work and to have people call you out as, well, that's not very nice of you, or aren't you being a bit rigid about this, or people do deserve second chances, or you're called out as being uppity when you remain calm as the narcissist is baiting you, when the enablers and the folks who don't get it come out of the woodwork to call you out, it feels absolutely terrible. So how do you tolerate it? Remember what I have always said. Lots of people still aren't comfortable with the idea of how narcissism works, the idea that it doesn't change, of the harm that it does. And lots of people really aren't comfortable with the idea that boundaries and disengagement are the only healthy way forward. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's our feel-good or toxic positivity culture that just wants to believe that we can be positive and optimistic and everything will just turn out right. I wish I lived in that world, because when it comes to this stuff, that simplistic way of thinking does not work. And it keeps people trapped in toxic situations. But the folks who want to keep the status quo, who want to maintain the status quo, those are the enablers, the narcissists themselves, and the naive folks who still believe that everyone can just get along. The narcissistic folks who are amongst us remind me of when we were all children, and there was always that one awful kid who was mean and nasty and would do troublesome things. But they had such a knack for looking like the angel when the teacher or the adults came out, that they would be smiling sweetly, and one of the other kids who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe trying to clean up the mess of the bad kid, was the one who would get called out for doing the bad thing that the manipulative little kid did, and the manipulative little kid would never come clean. The adult version of this happens all the time. Because here's what I really think is happening with adults. When you stay calm, when someone else is screaming at you, or electronically stalking you, and you disengage and you don't try to waste your time trying to reassure them, you make the narcissist someone else's problem. Back in the day when you did engage with them, you were the lightning rod. You were the one who had to clean up the messes. You were the one who engaged with them. And you were the one who had the fights with them. And that meant other people didn't have to. But once you disengage, the narcissistic person is like a shark. They just keep going until they find something else to eat. And they will start screaming and demanding and bothering other people. So it's easier to pathologize you for staying calm and disengaging, because now the narcissist is going to move on from you than actually taking on the unfixable problem of the narcissist. It's like a game of hot potato. Nobody really wants to deal with them, so they'll try to shame you so you keep dealing with them. Don't do it. In addition, once people understand what narcissism really is, ideally, they start distancing not just from the narcissistic person, but from all of the unhealthy people that they now recognize are in their lives. And that means that all those people are losing control and power over you. Well, as a collective, all of these toxic people don't like it. I'm not saying they talk to each other, but they don't like it. So if some of them do know each other, it's easier to shade you and talk smack about you than to look inward and wonder if it's them. That's never going to happen. It's easier to write you off as arrogant or full of yourself or passive-aggressive or mean than to wonder, maybe our behavior was really far less than optimal. So what do? How do you tolerate being labeled the rotten, awful person for not giving the narcissistic person what they want? So let me break this down for you, because number one, if you set boundaries, if that's what you've done, you aren't a bad person. You're just basically a grown-up truth teller. And people hate that this narcissism thing is a thing. I can't tell you how much criticism I get about it. Your behavior reminds them that they cannot stick their heads in the sand anymore. And your truth-telling may mean that the narcissist may start to target them instead, since you are no longer taking their abuse. And again, it's a game of hot potato. Number two, you are being gaslighted. Remember how this gaslighting dance goes. You're living your life, you're calm, you're minding your own business. The gaslighter is gaslighting you and denies your reality. You start defending and explaining and trying to make your reality known. You might even speak a little loudly. Then the gaslighter calmly says, "You need to calm down. You are acting crazy and this is too much drama." And yet, what set you off, the reason you got a little agitated, is because you were being accused of something that was simply not true. So once you figure out this dynamic, that it's your escalation in the face of the gaslighting, and then you're like, I'm just going to stay calm, and you no longer become reactive, then the narcissistic person gets agitated. And believe it or not, you will be judged not just by the narcissist, but by other people for staying so calm in the face of their reactivity. More often than not, you'll be labeled as passive-aggressive. Once again, now you're being gaslighted. You can't win. Always remember that. You can't win with either the narcissistic people or their enablers. Number three, stop trying to school other people on narcissism. People either get it or they don't. When I try to explain this to people who are still drinking the proverbial Kool-Aid, they label me as a mean person, or as a bad psychologist, or as anti-establishment, or as a crazed feminist, or something like that. At this point, we've heard it all. Bottom line, as an example, I knew that the only way my kids were going to learn math was by doing their own homework. I couldn't do it for them. It's the same thing. It's not my job to convince anyone. I put the information out there. People can do what they want with it. I am not a missionary. If people don't want to get it, I know that experience will end up being their best teacher, and when this happens to them, then I suppose maybe they'll get it. And the same goes for you. Do not try to school the unschooled. Your power
lies in you simply, you yourself, getting it. It's frustrating to watch someone not get it and keep getting played, or worse yet, listening to them criticize you. But it beats the hell out of wasting the time and effort trying to teach them something that they are not ready to learn. Number 4, stick to your guns. Don't budge. After going through narcissistic abuse, it is easy to keep doubting yourself and falling for it when people tell you that you aren't being nice since you are disengaging from difficult narcissistic folks, or that because you're not putting up with their BS. If you can figure out how to disengage from the narcissistic people in the world, quite frankly, you have a superpower. It's really that simple. The world at this present time in history is in the mess it is in because everyone keeps enabling the narcissistic folks and giving them second chances. You don't need to be a part of the problem. Other people calling you a bad person for actually not engaging with the narcissist allows them to stay in denial. They can stay in denial. You don't need to engage with them. Listen, none of us like being called the bad person, right? After years of feeling like a doormat or a repository of abuse or a punching bag, it sucks to transition to being the rotten person after going through so much. But it all comes down to the messenger, doesn't it? The people who call you out for setting boundaries and for not taking the bait just want to maintain the status quo and their convenient little lives. It becomes a wake-up call to you to clean house and set even more boundaries. I recognize that this can often be a lot of grief over so many losses, but these weren't healthy people for you. Self-preservation is a right. Always remember that. If that makes you a bad person, then I will happily call myself the baddest of the bad. You living authentically and in your truth scares the hell out of other people, especially when it comes to narcissism. Part of the healing from narcissistic abuse is being okay with other people not being okay. There is no version of this story where everyone gets what they want. What I want is I just want you healthy. As far as I'm concerned, the narcissistic people can go out and find new supply, as long as it's not you. How narcissistic folks, what they do is they paint this picture of the person who's scorned by the relationship as being unhinged. It's a way for them to keep their power and for them to gaslight you. Let's break this scenario down. So you're in a narcissistic relationship, or maybe you know someone who is. The narcissistic person betrays you. Let's assume it's you in the relationship. They betray you. Maybe they cheat. Maybe they break up with you, and by the first weekend, they're already full on dating someone new. Whatever it is, whatever that betrayal is, you're deeply hurt and angry. So let's just stop there. Being angry is a normal reaction. You loved someone. You were in a relationship. If they were narcissistic, I'm guessing there were some problems in the relationship, but you believed you were in a relationship. To be betrayed in a relationship, whether it is in real life cheating, whether it's sort of texty cheating, inappropriate messages, inappropriate photos, it hurts. So we get angry. We have a reaction. Normal. And as you're angry about that betrayal, you may talk to other people about it. You may tell people about it. You may viciously look at their social media for clues. You may raise the volume of your voice when you talk to them, which is what people do when they're hurt and betrayed and angry. You may obsess. You may ruminate. You may lose trust. You may ask other people about it. If you live together, you may ask them to leave your shared residence immediately, or you may move out. You may stay together and just keep asking them questions about it. But none of us, no one in this situation would just be chill when this happens, because you're having real and powerful emotions around betrayal, and it is normal to experience them, and it is normal to express them. The funny thing about narcissistic folks who get caught in a betrayal, they kind of get mad if you talk to other people about it. You see, when they betrayed your trust, their cheating became part of your story. And so it's fine for you to talk about your story with other people. It's yours. They brought you into this mess by betraying you, but yet they get churlish about you doing it. So you do express it. Like I said, maybe you kick them out. Maybe you tell others. Maybe you stay together and you cry a lot, or you yell at them. Maybe you leave their stuff in a box on the front step. All of those are within the range of normal reactions when someone's betrayed. But then the narcissistic person starts painting you as the dysregulated person who's unhinged. You know, we hear the trope of the woman scorned all the time. And the narcissistic person who did the betraying and the hurting and the bad thing, they sort of coolly stand there as you are having a real, understandable emotional reaction. And they then paint you as dysregulated and extra and dramatic. A lot of like that. Although there has been some progress, and I do in the last 100 years, that we recognize people have to express emotion, I still believe we continue to pathologize people for showing emotion. So if the cheater is standing there as calm as can be, and that's what narcissistic cheaters do, and you are having strong emotions as you would, you can see, though, how people may fall for the characterization of you as the problem, that you're the one that just needs to move on and stuff happens. I don't think so. This invalidation of the normal human experience that happens when a person is betrayed is one of the most sort of cutting elements I have witnessed in people going through narcissistic relationships that end badly. A person cheats on someone and ends a long-term relationship or has to shift a long-term relationship, and yet the person who was hurt is painted as the person scorned and all that hell hath no fury BS. It is gaslighting because it is in essence a denial of reality and a portrayal of normal emotion after betrayal as dysfunctional. Other people are uncomfortable with emotion. Too many people are uncomfortable with emotion and will say, can't you just let it go? Or, oh, come on, now you know that new person they're with, they're going to have the same problems you had. None of that's reassuring when you're in the pain of the betrayal and the loss and the crushing of trust. The more they paint you as scorned or emotional or dramatic or worse, they'll say, oh, God, can you see I had to put up with this? And obviously the unspoken is that, so you can see, well, I did what I had to do, right? If someone betrays you, scorn is normal. Too many survivors of betrayal are sold the message of, just be chill. That's going to show them. You just need to be chill. I'm not so sure that's great advice. You're hurt. Why would you be chill? Your heart is broken. Why would you just sedately sit there? What are you showing them? In fact, you being chill is merely conveniencing the narcissistic person who can't be bothered with your emotion and already has so little empathy that they're not really caring about hurting you. So if you try to play that chill card, oh, look at me, I'm just chill, this didn't bother me, forget the narcissistic person, they don't care. But it did in fact bother you. And being in a narcissistic relationship is already a negation of your emotional world, of your identity, of your sense of self. So now when you're hurt, you're also being told to tone it down by the world? No. The biggest part of healing is allowing yourself to live and feel fully again. Now listen, I'm going to be the first one to say problematic post-betrayal is not okay. Okay, no dangerous stalking, no threats, no defamation, no telling minor children things that they're not able to hear, never violence. None of that's okay, no matter how angry you are about a betrayal. But emotion, talking about it, telling people who are close to you what's happening and not feeling the need to protect the narcissist's reputation. Not wanting to be available to the narcissist exactly when it works for them to roll up with a moving truck. Crying at times, all of that's healthy. And anyone who pathologizes normal reactions to betrayal is gaslighting a person who is going through something real. Listen, I have to own it. I'm guilty of it too. I've said to more than a few friends who've gone through this, you're lucky, now there's someone else's problem. Now listen, someday every survivor is going to see it that way, but now if you're going through it, it hurts. Now it's sifting through the confusion. You're almost sitting like a forensic scientist trying to construct the timeline of their betrayal, questioning yourself, how did I miss it? You feel foolish, and all of that feels terrible. and you need time to grieve. Don't cancel out your emotions because you're being shamed for them or you're being told it's a show of strength. The hell it is. The strength is being real with yourself and not feeling you need to hide because someone else did you wrong. And keep in mind, these betrayals don't always end up with you leaving the relationship. Sometimes you stay. And guess what? When you stay for a while, you need to process it. You need to let it go. You need to talk it out. You need to cry. And you may not trust this person right away. And many narcissistic people, they'll have one of their betrayals and they want the relationship back, and you do go back. And then they want everything to go back to normal. It's not how life works. But again, that idea of giving yourself the time and space to be able to experience the feeling, whether you stay or not in the relationship, whether it ends, whatever happens, there's a pretty wide range of what is normal sort of post-betrayal behavior out there. But I think so many people get this message, just play it cool. You'll show them by playing it cool. They'll see they didn't get under your skin. They don't care if they got under your skin. But and they don't need to see your emotion all the time. But you expressing your emotion is crucial. And people shaming that and saying, oh, come on, move on, life happens. Those are people actually who may not be healthy for you either. So, have any of you had something like this happen? You have a narcissistic family, okay? You don't pay attention to what I tell you, but that's okay. You don't pay attention to this, that it's a bad idea to call out a narcissist, that it's a bad idea to call out a toxic person in the family, or that you don't maybe call them out, but you actually point out the toxic dynamics, right? Have you ever done that? Maybe you try to point out a family member who's always making themselves the victim, or that a family member is always triangulating, or someone is thriving on chaos, or a family member who keeps talking about their accomplishments and is very grandiose. You try to point out this pattern. You even frame it as being unhealthy. You ever done that? I get it if you did, especially if you're around your family a lot. But then you do that, and guess what? And then you're called jealous. Trying to bring clarity into a narcissistic family system is a thankless task at best. Self-immolation, or basically setting yourself on fire at worst. There is still that darned hope that plagues everyone in these relationships. Maybe if I can find a gentle way to point it out, then maybe we can work towards something normal, or people will finally see the truth I am speaking. Hell, you may even be pointing it out, not even so much to benefit yourself, but because you see that another family member is being harmed by these unhealthy patterns, and you want to stop it for their sake. But it's almost impossible to crack through the denial of any family system, least of all a narcissistic family system. Families are brutal spaces. When we were children, we needed them, right? We needed our food, we needed shelter, we needed people to look out for us. As the world evolves and changes and we grow up, we sort of need them less on a practical level. We can make friends and build other kinds of close relationships. But when it comes down to it in families, we still seem to need them on a psychological level. These places of our histories, our early attachments, our hope of having a space where people look like us and know our histories and were genetically or custodially assigned to us. So there's a lot of investment in making families work, even when they are woefully broken. There is a lot of shame when a person doesn't have a healthy, functioning family system. A sense of perhaps there is something wrong with me because I'm from a messy family or a chaotic family, or I'm detached from my family. However, then we get into the ugliness of cognitive dissonance. If I want to be part of this family, well, I'm from a good family. I've got to, who wants to be a part of something bad, right? So you justify it. But when you hit that wall, you just can't justify anymore, and you want to bring clarity. Many people will say that they were told that they are just jealous or covetous of the toxic person, who's often a sibling in the family. That will happen. You're sort of pointing out a pattern in a sibling. Oh, you're just jealous that your sister's getting married. Stop it. You're just jealous that your brother's business is doing good. Oh, come on now. You always wanted to be the one to get all the attention, and now he is. However they frame it, you're trying to point something out. Now you're jealous, right? So now it's twice as bad. Not only have you brought no clarity to the table, but people are now hitting you with these sort of gaslighted accusations about a pathology in you, your jealousy. You may even pause and wonder, am I? Maybe I am jealous of my sister. I don't know about that part, but what I do know is that when a person tries to shed a light on these systems, and it's not just families, it can be workplaces, that if you try to point out the toxic behaviors of a colleague, that the workplace response may be, oh, she's just jealous of that person's rapid rise in the company, or whatever it is that they think that you may be jealous of. It kind of effectively silences you too. You don't feel like you can point it out because you don't want to have that accusation, especially if it's not true. Now, these accusations of jealousy, when people try to take on narcissistic people or point out the patterns, can be unsettling and angering. It can shut down the discourse, but like I said, nobody wants to be seen as jealous. It can also foster self-doubt and even self-blame. It can reinforce a false narrative within a family system. And worst of all, can allow the toxic, narcissistic dynamics within the family system to persist indefinitely and maybe even get worse. Because it is a message to the toxic person or people in a family system that if anyone dares to try to identify these patterns, then they will be the ones to be made to seem flawed or damaged. That's how deep this denial goes. Many times, the narcissistic people in a family system will accuse anyone who is trying to bring clarity. They'll accuse them of rocking the boat or being disloyal. It's very similar to these jealousy accusations. This is depressing because it's really a wake-up call that it is very rare to be able to bring these dynamics to light and have people see them. If you see them, often the best you can hope for is to disengage, keep these folks at arm's length, practice some radical acceptance, and honestly, your disengagement may mean that other people are having to start to bear the wrath of the narcissist in the system, or they may have to see it more clearly because you're not there anymore, and they may come over to your more clear and wise side of the street on their own without you having to point it out and be called the jealous one. Let me know if this has ever happened to you. It's angering when it does. Thanks again.